Alright, hello everybody. Welcome back to my Unity game development tutorial series. Today I'm going to be talking about Git and version control. And I know I said in the last episode that I was going to be talking about moving around in the Unity editor, but I kind of changed my plans a little bit because I realized that I needed to do a video on Git before the Global Game Jam, because this is something you're going to have to get set up preferably before you do the jam. So I'm going to do the second video on Git, even though it is going to throw a little bit of a wrench in the plans for some things. But let's just go ahead and jump right into it. So what is Git and version control? It is really just a way to collaborate on a coding project. And you can think of it in a way as kind of a cloud server system where one person can make some changes and they can send it up to the cloud, and then another person that is also working on the same project can then go to the cloud and retrieve those files. That's how a cloud system would normally work, right? In Git, it's a little bit different because Git will not necessarily always be downloading and uploading and re-downloading files. Git will work line by line if it can. So this means that if you have a script that you made and it's in a project and there's a couple people working on the project, and then you need to go make some changes to that script and you need to add another 10 lines. Well, you can go add your 10 lines to the code you wrote, and then you can push that to what we call a repository, which I'll explain what that means a little later. And then the other person that's working with you can then pull from the repository, and the changes in the code that you wrote will be written in the actual script that they have, that version of the script, without them having to re-download it. So it's very nice for working with large projects that involve a lot of code. That way you don't have to constantly re-download multiple gigabytes of files that you already have. So let's just jump right into the setup, because I'm going to try and make this video a little faster than the last time. This is the downloads page where you can find the downloads for all the different versions, and the link for this will be in the description. I am on Windows, so I'm going to use the Windows version. I know in the last tutorial, I kind of just downloaded everything on Windows, but if you are on Mac or Linux, make sure you do the Mac or Linux options. I'm going to do the download for Windows because that's what I have, and just click on the latest version up here at the top. Don't worry about the other versions down here. This first link at the top should be what you're looking for, and go ahead and click that to start downloading. Alright, so once that finishes, you're going to want to go ahead and run the git installer, which is this right here. Allow access. Alright, and here is the license. You can read all that, but don't really bother. You will need a certain amount of space that's shown down here to install this. It's not very big, so I would not really worry about installing it on your main drive at all, so I'm just going to install it on C. If this comes up, this means that you already have probably installed Git before. I have in this case, so I'm just going to choose to overwrite it. If this happens to you, just click yes. And here on the component screen, there's going to be a few different things that you want to make sure you have set up. Under the Windows Explorer integration tree, just make sure that you have both of these selected for Git Bash here and Git GUI here. That can be helpful a couple times. And make sure that you also have everything else that I have checked in yours as well. I'm not really going to explain what all these means because I don't really have a great grasp on what all these mean, but just know that they are necessary for Git to function. Alright, and then you're going to hit next. This is just creating a start menu shortcut for you to search Git in the taskbar and it show up. So just leave that as Git. And for the default editor, this is what Git will use when there is some sort of error or problem that we call a merge conflict usually. And it's going to have to open this in some type of IDE. Now, if you were following the last video, you should have Visual Studio as an option here. And you also have a couple other options like Notepad+. Vim is the default, which I wouldn't really recommend using. I personally use Visual Studio Code. That's what I'd recommend if you have it installed. If not, You can use Visual Studio if you have it here, or you can just use Notepad or Vim in a worst case scenario. You're typically not going to run into issues often where this comes up. So if you do have to just leave it as Vim, you should be all right. But prefer to have some type of Visual Studio program as the default editor. And you're just going to want to let Git decide here, that default option. Again, the default option here, that's the recommended Git from the command line. Use bundled OpenSSH. Use the OpenSSL library. Use the checkout Windows style. And use the default terminal. And default fast forward merge. Get credential manager. And then enable file system caching. And then we don't want any of these experimental versions. And then you want to hit install. And I know I went through that really fast, but that's just because I don't really understand a lot of what that is. But just trust me that you need those for Git to work. And then once that finishes installing, you're just going to see this window. Just uncheck both of these. We don't need to look at them right now. And then hit finish. Alright, so next up, we're going to need to install a Git GUI. And I say need to, but it's not necessarily true. See, if I minimize this right now and I go to my desktop, there is an option that I can do, because I'm on Windows 11, I have to go to show more options. But now you'll see that there's an option here to Git GUI here or Git bash here. And when I do this, this will open a terminal right here where I can do things in Git. And that is kind of scary because terminals are kind of hard to use. So what we do instead is we use something called a GUI or graphical user interface to operate Git. And one of them that's a really great option and that is free is GitHub Desktop. And this is a really, really, really great integration with the GitHub website. It's super easy to use and it's 100% free for everything you'll need to do. There is another option called GitKraken, which you might have to install in some of your other classes, and it is free with an asterisk. It's free as long as your repository meets certain conditions, and since that is the case, I figured that I would just make this tutorial with GitHub Desktop that has no real strings attached and that is very easy to use. I use this personally. I can vouch for it. It's really great. But if you're interested, you can go look up GitKraken instead. I'll have a link to that as well down in the description, as well as the link for GitHub Desktop for this download. So again, I'm going to go ahead and hit download for Windows because that's what I have. Alright, and while it's downloading, you're going to want to come to github.com. Again, I'll have the link for this down in the description. And you're going to want to make a GitHub account. If this is your first time ever making one, go ahead and sign up. If you have an account already, just sign in here. The sign up process is pretty straightforward. There's a little wizard that kind of guides you through everything. But I can't do that since I already have an account with the email. So I'm just going to go ahead and sign in. Alright, and then you're going to go to your Git page that looks something like this. The sign up should probably take you here. If it doesn't, just go back to github.com and then sign in with your new account. And now that you've set that up, you should be able to use GitHub Desktop. Alright, so assuming your download is finished by now, you're going to want to go into your downloads folder and then double click on the setup, and then it's going to really quickly run through all the setup that you need for GitHub Desktop. And once that's finished, it will open the application that looks like this. And yours is probably not going to have all this stuff here or a current repository, and you may not know what any of this stuff even is yet, and that's fine. Because I already have some projects in Git, it's going to show up here, but I'm going to just walk you through a lot of what this whole menu does. Over here in the top left, you're going to find your current repository. And I mentioned earlier that I would explain what a repository is, and you can still think of it in that example of the cloud server. It's kind of like the cloud in this instance, where it's where your project lives somewhere on the internet that people will have access to pull and to push to. And these can be called anything. I have this repo right here. I have this one. I have this one and this one. And these are all different projects that I have access to that I can push to and pull from based on whatever changes I need to add. And you can add a new repository by going to this add button and then cloning a repository. You can create a new repository or add an existing one. So let me just show you, if I hit clone, it's going to ask you to sign in and continue with browser. And then it's like the Unity Hub video from before. You're just going to want to click open in GitHub Desktop. And that'll sign you in. And then you're going to want to go back to the clone repository button. And now you'll see that these are all the repositories that your account has access to. The ones on the left over here are just the ones that I have locally on my computer that I can pull and push to. These are all the ones that I have available on my account that I can clone. Cloning a repository is what we mean by making a copy of it on your computer. So in a typical environment, you will clone a repository, you will make some changes to that repository, you will push those changes, and then you will pull changes that other people make. And like I said, you can add the ones that are already on your account, or you can add them through a specific URL. And I'll go through what all that is in a little bit in the later half of the video. But for now, just know that is where you go to clone a repository. All right, so all of these other things are also really important. You have your branch and your kind of status of your local repo. Repo is just shorthand for repository, if you hear me mention that during the video. And this is where you're going to interact with your current branch. And a branch is essentially just a list of commits that have been made to the project. So as you can see here, there's a lot of people that have been working on this project, and these are kind of all linear. And the reason we call it branches, and the reason we talk in terms of trees, is because like this little symbol here, you can have a straight line, but you can also have a branch that comes over here to the side and then eventually folds back into the main branch. That's why you see under the current branch, we are on the main branch. There are no other branches in this repository. We are on the main branch. And usually all you'll be pushing to and pulling from is the main branch. If you are making a new branch, I would suggest that you know what you're doing before you go into that. I'm not really going to cover that here. That's a little bit more advanced than I want to get into. But just know that you should, generally speaking, unless you're told otherwise, always be on the main branch. And you already saw a bit over here on the left where you can preview the changes that you've made. So these are all of the files that are in my local clone of the repository that are different from the ones that are on the server's repository. And if I wanted to push these changes that I have here to the server's repository, I'm going to use this button. And right now it says pull. And that's because there's a certain order that you're going to want to follow when you are committing, pulling, pushing, all of these different kind of verbs that you use when working with repositories. And the general order of them will be commit, pull, push, pull. And I'll explain what all those mean in a minute. But let's just say I wanted to push these changes. So the first thing I need to do is come down to this text box right below it where it says summary. And I'm just going to type in general AI manager because that's what I did. And you can leave this description box empty if you feel like your summary of what you did in this commit is good enough. You don't have to put anything in the description box. But then you're going to want to hit the button down here that says commit. And after you hit the commit button, you'll see that you have no local changes anymore. This will pop up here. And you may notice something's a little different about this pull origin button that you've been seeing. And now what a commit does is it essentially stashes these changes that you've made and says, okay, these are changes that you would want to keep, and now let's see if we can put them on this branch with every other person's work as well. So after you've committed and tell Git that you want to hold on to those files, you're going to want to pull the origin. This is kind of what's going to reconcile your changes with everyone else's changes and make sure that there's no issues. And then once that finishes, you'll see that push commits to the origin remote. You have 2 local commits waiting to be pushed to GitHub. And now you can push to the origin. So go ahead and do that. And now you can see this is fetch origin. And this is essentially just a refresh. It's going to check and see if anyone else has made any pushes that you need to get on your local machine. So I'm just going to go ahead and fetch again to make sure nobody did anything else. Nope. All right, seems like we're good. We're up to date. And now you can see over here that there are a bunch of other commits. So you can see that some people, I follow script, all these people push their changes, and that's now in this one single branch of the project. And now when anyone pulls it, they'll get all of those changes. And if you got absolutely nothing from that, don't worry. All you need to know is here is where your local changes will be. Here is where you want to title what you've done. You hit commit, you hit pull, and then you hit push. And if anything ever kind of breaks or deviates from that expected way of doing things, ask someone that is more experienced than you in Git, like an upperclassman on your team or an instructor, and they more than likely will know how to fix the issue or whether or not it's something that is normal or is not normal. But there's a lot of ways that you can break Git, and it's better to play it safe and just ask someone that maybe knows more about it if you encounter something that is a little odd. All right, so now that we've kind of established what all of these buttons are, how they work, what they do, and some of the rules and etiquette you should follow when using Git, you'll need to actually, use that in your team's repository. And to do that, like I mentioned earlier, you're going to need to clone the repository first. And to do that, you go up to your current repository, you go to add, just like before, and then clone repository. And here you'll see all of the repositories that your GitHub account has access to. And normally, whoever on your team sets up the repository will add your GitHub account as a contributor of the project, and therefore it will appear here. If it doesn't, because it's too new, there is a workaround that you can do. Instead, you can go to the project page that will look somewhat like this. This is just a page for an example repo. And if you go to this code button, and then you go to open with GitHub Desktop, and then open GitHub Desktop, as you can see, it'll fill in this link right here. You can choose the path where you want it to go, and then you can hit clone. All right, and then once that finishes, you'll see here that my current repository is now this repository from earlier. You can find it in the list right here, along with all the other repositories that I have access to. And you can see that you have all of the same buttons that you had before, and you can start working. All right, everybody, that's pretty much all I got for this video. I might make another one in the future that goes over how to set up your own Git repository. And this video was really just to cover the pushing and pulling and operating GitHub Desktop for people to be able to work inside of a repo that somebody else makes, just to get this out in time for Global Game Jam and just to keep it pretty short and to the point. Remember Global Game Jam on February 3rd. Make sure to be there for that. Game Development Club meetings, 7:30 p.m. every Thursday in Wilson 119. Make sure to show up. If you like this video and you want to see some more tutorials in the future, make sure to subscribe so you can be alerted whenever there is a new video. I'll also be pinging the Game Development Discord, so be on the lookout for any of those. Next time I make a video, it will definitely be on how to operate in the Unity editor. But until then, thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you next time.